In this presentation, we will pay bills within QuickBooks Pro 2019. For more accounting information and accounting courses, visit our website at accountinginstruction.info. Here we are on the home page. We currently have the open windows open. The way to have the open windows open is to go to the View tab drop down and go to Open Windows List. What we're going to do at this time is use the Pay Bills feature. You can see as we look at this vendor section of the home page what the flowchart will typically be when we are relating to vendors. That will be we can enter the bill and then we can pay the bill. That's going to be the typical kind of flow, other than flows that we are dealing with inventory, in which case we may have a purchase order and then we're going to receive payment, and when we receive payment, I'm going to close this back out. I meant to hit the drop down. And then when we receive payment, we can receive payment with a bill or receive payment without a bill and enter the bill at this time, and then basically pay the bill. Now, this is going to be the most standard if we're a service company, of course, and also it may be the case that we do not have this first step of enter bills and pay bills and go directly to writing a check. You may ask, why isn't the writing a check item in the vendor tab as opposed to down here in banking? Because usually when we write a check, we write checks to vendors. But note that we could write checks for many other type of things as well. So we might write a check to pay back a loan or something like that, where we might not have a vendor but have it set up as basically other. So writing a check then, although it probably most of the time fits into our flowchart here, is not the item that we're going to have up in the vendor section for that reason, because the writing a check is more general in nature. Now the pay bills feature here is in essence writing checks. However, these checks are going to be very specific checks in that we're writing checks that had gone through the enter bills icon, and therefore writing checks for accounts payable related items. In other words, this system works really well if we want to enter our bills into the system and then group them together and pay them at some point in the future. If we are having a system where we have done this month, where we just basically wrote the checks at the end of the month, if we just have the checks on our desk and we're going to write them all at the end of the month, then we could just use the write checks feature here. However, it's often really beneficial to enter the checks into the system as a bill and then write them at a later time. And that does a couple things. One, it enters the bill into the system at the point in time that the bill is there, has arrived, which is better for an accrual basis. We should be recording, this will trigger when we record the expense typically. And we should be doing that closer to the time we got the bill, because that's usually closer to the time we actually consumed the goods or services that's the result of the bill. It also allows us to then pay the bills all basically at one time. So if we're paying this information out of the system, we can then decide which bills we want to pay, which bills we do not want to pay, and then check off the ones we do. And if we're paying it within QuickBooks, this will make it easy for us to just print all those checks at the same time and print those out. So this is a really useful feature for those two items. Also, the enter bills will, of course, go through accounts payable, and we'll be able to track what we owe to the vendors within the system, rather than just having paper documentation on our desk and checking due dates on it. It's better to put it into the system, tell the system what the due date is, and then track when we have to make that payment each day in the system as we go. So that's what we're going to do here. Now, this month we made most of our transactions as cash transactions, so we didn't enter the bills. In the next month's transactions, we'll do more accrual-based stuff, and we will enter more bills. There is one bill that we had entered, however, and that was the vendor balance beginning balance. We had a beginning balance for one particular customer. And so that went into a bill because that's what QuickBooks did with it. It put it into accounts payable. So what we're going to do now is pay that bill. So we're going to go to the pay bill item. Before we do that, one more thing, we want to take a look at reports. We want to go to the report, company and financials, and go down to the balance sheet. So we're in the balance sheet. And I'm going to make the custom dates up here, custom reporting. And we're going to make the date range 01/01/19 to 12/31/19. And let's view that report. So here we have this. Now what we're looking at is this accounts payable. This accounts payable is what we're going to be dealing with when we pay the bill, meaning we're going to decrease cash, and we're going to decrease the accounts payable, the amount owed. If we double click on this, we will see who is there, and that's going to be, we'll have to change the date back to 2018 for our purposes. And so we entered this before the time period that we started. This is the beginning balance, which we entered on 12/31. So that's one place we can see this item. Note also, if we go to reports up top, if we go to vendors and payables, and we look at the vendor balance detail, then once again we see that Epiphone is our only vendor that we owe right now. So those are the two reports we're dealing with here. So we're going to go back to the home page and simply select the pay bill item. Now, as we'll see next month, there'll be more items here, of course, that we could have a lot of bills that we have owed, and we can manage in this screen, which is really useful to be able to manage it within this screen, because then again, it's all in the system, and we can manage which bills we want to pay. So the bill we're going to pay here, of course, will be this item. We're going to pay it by just selecting that item. So we're going to say that's the one we want to pay. Now, if we go through these items, we could, these are some useful options within the pay bills, due on or before. If we wanted to select this item, if we had a lot of bills we want to pay, this will trim the list down to only a certain group of items to a date that is on or before, and that'll help us to limit the amount of data that we have in this area and be able to select which ones we are using. The default is just to see all bills, so we can see all the bills here. So if you have this selected, then that's going to limit the amount of bills that are in accounts payable. We could have a filter here. We could filter the bills that we want to look at specifically in the pay bills section. We've got the sort by different items. And note, if we select this item, I'm going to keep it on all vendors. So if you click this and click off of it, it may delete the all vendors, in which case you got to go back in here and say all vendors. Okay, and then the due date. Sorts by due date. We could sort by discount date, vendor, amount due. So we could sort this information by, in essence, these columns up top. Then once we check this, we'll get these items down below. We could go to the bill. So if I select this item, it'll go to the bill for Epiphone. So we'll select this, and that'll give us the more detail if we want more detail for the actual bill. I'm going to close this back out. We've got the set discount and set credits as well. And then we've got the payment information. This is going to be the payment of the check. So if we write the check, of course, we want to make sure that we're writing the check as of the correct date. The method is going to be a check in this case. We could have a credit card as well. And notice the default here is to be printed, meaning the default is thinking that we're going to print these checks from QuickBooks. To do that, we would need to have pre-printed checks from our bank that are formatted, that will be in alignment with QuickBooks, put them into the printer, and then we can print these checks as we do this. If we don't have the pre-printed checks, then we're going to assign a check number. And that's what we're going to do here for the practice problem. So this also works if you're writing the checks manually with the checkbook, and then we just want to enter this data into the system as well. And then we've got the account, of course, will be the checking account. That'll be the typical default. If we have more than one cash account, then we got to make sure that we are in the correct cash account. Now, as we print this, it may ask us to assign the check number. In other words, it might not automatically assign it. If we have multiple checks, it's going to start at the first check number we assign and then assign the rest check numbers accordingly. That could get a little messy when we assign the check numbers. So what we want to do is go to the check register and make sure that this is all happening properly. So if we go to the banking up top and go to use register, then, and notice what it did here, it defaulted not to the check register but to the accounts payable register. And that happened. Why did it do that? Because we're in accounts payable. So QuickBooks is trying to say the register you're probably looking at is accounts payable. We want to get to the check register. So this is one time when this drop down doesn't really get us to the check register. There's a couple other ways we can do that. So be aware that that could happen just by the nature of what screen you happen to be on. This one being a bill related to accounts payable. So instead, I'm going to go to lists over here and say I want to go to the chart of accounts. And then I'm just going to double check on the checking account, and that should bring us to the register. So I'm going to double click the checking account, and there's our register. So if ever you go to the check register from the banking dropdown and you say, hey, that's not my banking check register, it may be because QuickBooks sees you're in another screen and tries to guess which register you're looking for. So as we create the checks, then they'll appear in the check register, and they'll assign the check number here. We can double check that the check numbers have been assigned properly in accordance with the checks that we are writing physically. Okay, so then we're going to go back to the pay bill in the open windows. I can close out this accounts payable register. We don't need that. So I'm going to close that out. We're going to go back to the pay bill. So here's our pay bill. And we're just going to pay that bill now. And again, we have the assigned check number here. So pay selected bills is what we will select. And then it wants us to assign the check number. Again, if we don't know what that is, we'll have to, it doesn't populate it automatically. So we could go, how do you want to assign the check numbers? Let QuickBooks assign it, or let me assign the check number. If we want to choose the second option, which it defaulted to, we can go to the checking account, look what the next account number is, and use that. Or if we're writing the checks physically, then we would have that on the first check we write. Or we can let QuickBooks assign it, and QuickBooks should assign it properly. So I'm going to choose this option, then go to the check register and see what QuickBooks has done, see if it has assigned them properly. So we're going to say OK. And then it gives you a pop-up, never run out of checks. It's trying to sell us more checks, which we may want. We probably, if we don't want it, we want to do not display this again. That's basically kind of an advertisement. It's a useful one because it may be something we need. But I'm going to turn that off and say OK. And so there we have it. I'm going to close this and say done. And now if we go into our checking account, which it went to, that because that's my other screen that was open. If it's not, go to Open Windows Checking Account. So here it is. Here's the item that has been added. And it added the correct check number, we would think, because that's the next one in alignment. If it were not the case, we could change this. So if this was not correct, we can change this within the register after the fact. Note that it's not a check that it labels here, but a bill payment. So it is a check. We are writing a check. But QuickBooks labels it a little bit differently to indicate to us, hey, this went through accounts payable. You know that because it's a bill payment, not simply a check, which means it did not go through accounts payable. So if you double click on this bill payment, in other words, you'll still go to a check. It's still just a check. But this check, we know, given the fact that it says bill payment, is a check for something that went through accounts payable. So let's check the financial statements and see what happens there. I'm going to close this back out. We're going to go to the balance sheet. And the accounts that will be affected here is going to be the accounts payable account. Well, the checking account. Let's check that. Checking account's going to go down. We wrote a check. Double clicking on it. There's the check we wrote. Again, it doesn't say check. It says bill payment, then check. So that indicates to us, we could see that, and we don't even really need this split screen to say what's the other account, because it was a bill payment. It must have gone out of accounts payable. So here's the accounts payable, the split account. If we double click on it, we say that it is indeed a check. If I close that out, that'll be similar to any other check. If I double click on any other check, it's also a check. The thing that differs is the expense versus if I close this out and we go to this check, we have, in this case, the vendor that we're paying out here. That's going to be the difference. So we're going to close this back out. Other side went to accounts payable. And if we scroll down, we don't see accounts payable. Why? Because it's 0 now. So therefore, to get to accounts payable, a couple different options. We could once again go to the lists up top, chart of accounts. And we could then go down to the liabilities and go to the accounts payable, which is going to be its own kind of liability. Before liabilities, it's still a liability. Double click on it. And then there we'll see that. So there it is. We paid it. There it is. Bill payment. Double clicking on that. We see the bill payment. The other place we could find it is if we go to reports, we go to accounting and taxes, and we go to the trial balance. And this is more of an accounting document or form 010119 to 123119. And so this will give us, again, that 0 there. It shows us the 0 because there was activity in this account during the period covered. So even though it's 0, it's going to say, hey, maybe you want to double click on it and look at the detail. So we'll give it the here. Double clicking on it, and then it gives us the detail. Okay, so that report's useful in that case. And it's also useful because it has both balance sheet accounts, closing that out. It has balance sheet accounts and income statement accounts. So it has everything there if we want to just look at it. It does have debits and credits, so if we don't understand debits and credits, that could be a little confusing. But if you just want to see a list of all the accounts and drill down on some of those accounts, zoom in on them, then this is a useful report. One other report we want to look at, we're going to look through the vendor balance detail once again. It's actually open. I'll go over here in the open windows, vendor balance detail, and we can see that it is now 0. So we now paid off, there's no vendor balance because we paid off Epiphone. For more accounting information and accounting courses, visit our website at accountinginstruction.info.